The Lord be with you. A reading from the Holy Gospel according to Matthew. Jesus spoke to the crowds and to his disciples, saying, "The scribes and the Pharisees have taken their seat on the chair of Moses. Therefore, do and observe all things whatsoever they tell you, but do not follow their example. For they preach, but they do not practice. They tie up heavy burdens hard to carry and lay them on people's shoulders, but they will not lift a finger to move them. All their works are performed to be seen. They widen their phylacteries and lengthen their tassels. They love places of honor at banquets, seats of honor in synagogues, greetings in marketplaces, and the salutation, 'Rabbi.' As for you, do not be called Rabbi. You have but one teacher, and you are all brothers. Call no one on earth your father. You have but one Father in heaven. Do not be called Master. You have but one Master, the Christ. The greatest among you must be your servant. Whoever exalts himself will be humbled, but whoever humbles himself will be exalted." The Gospel of the Lord. Praise to you, Lord Jesus Christ.
Yeah, great. With this, with the 23rd chapter of Matthew's Gospel, we're launching into the fifth great teaching block of Matthew's Gospel. So there's, of course, this parallel between Jesus and Moses, and it's, of course, not for nothing that we hear here about the law and those who are, not say enthroned, but those who are seated in such manner as to give interpretation of the law. But of course, they're not living up to the standards of what they're teaching. I don't know. I don't really want to get turned around in that particular circle. There are other circles I'd prefer to get turned around in this gospel passage. But we do see that. So we're in, I think, 23, 24, 25. Those three chapters of Matthew's Gospel is the last teaching block and the fifth teaching block of Jesus in Matthew's Gospel. So to give you that kind of basic context, and then of course the context that we've seen and that we've kind of lived in this past week or so, to say, you know, the coming conflagration or the coming conflict that ends in the cross is right here. Jesus is in Jerusalem, so this is not like we sometimes have the idea, and of course because we proclaim the gospel in assembly, we stand up, we sit down. You know, Father Daniel gets up, he says some nice words or some not so nice words, and then we move on, and we get this idea of Jesus the teacher, and Jesus the teacher is fine, but this is part of his mission to raise up God's fallen world. And how does he do it? He does it by walking the way of self-gift and going to the cross to suffer our fate so that we don't have to shoulder the burden ourselves. If we follow him, that what was otherwise an impossibly heavy burden to bear becomes his light burden, his easy yoke. But we have to trust and follow him and walk with him in that way, in that direction, in order to experience for ourselves the light burden and the easy yoke. Okay, so this is all going on here. It's all going on with, like I said, I had to say the walls are closing in on Jesus, but we should be able to feel the tension rise. And of course, he's taking a shot at the people who are going to go turn him in. And if we don't think that one has anything to do with the other, then we have to wake up. Right? I know it's early, but we still have to wake up. Yeah, because of course, one does have something to do with the other. And Jesus is throwing it, he's not just walking into the teeth of it, he's throwing himself into the teeth of it. Because he has to accomplish what he was sent to accomplish. He has to bear witness to the truth. The truth of who God is, the truth of what God's creation is and how God views it, the truth of who man is and how God intends to relate to man, and all the rest. But there, we might need to be shaken up out of our slumber as well, because we're very much in our culture. And if we're in our culture, we mainly absorb all the ways the culture thinks about the many different things that we think about. Right? So even the things of God, God's creation, God's relationship with man, we have very cultural, what I mean is we have a very 21st century American contemporary conception of God and of my relationship with God and what that all means. And Jesus here, again, is rewriting it against the expectations of the people of his day. But we should allow him to do that for us as well. And it has to be, again, the main things, right? We heard recently in the Gospel of Matthew, right, the greatest commandment. And here we see, right, Jesus is saying, the whole law and the prophets are footnotes to the greatest commandment, love of God and love of neighbor as self. And here, what we see, he's talking about all these different things that say he is of the mind don't relate to the fulfillment of love of God and love of neighbor as self. And one of the questions that we have to ask ourselves when we encounter this passage is the things that I'm doing or not doing, the things that I'm thinking or not thinking, my relationship with God, how I'm relating with God, my quote-unquote spiritual life, my life of devotion, all the rest. Does this all relate to my loving God with my whole heart, mind, soul, and strength, and my neighbor as myself? My friends, if it doesn't, we've got to change something. And it may not be that we change the practices. It may be that we change the way that we go about the practices. Right? I'm not going to tell people you should not have a devotional life. You should have a devotional life. But your devotional life ought not be a way to either appease God or to get from God what you want. Your devotional life, you know what I mean? Like your life of prayer and the various devotions that you pray, that should be a way, bless you, that should be a way that your heart is inflamed by love of God and gives voice to the fact that you love God with your whole heart, mind, soul, and strength, and your neighbor as yourself. That's what a life of devotion needs to cultivate in you, in us. So this is one of the ways that Jesus challenges us here. Okay, and now I won't get into that. There's so much I wish. No, he's not. He don't want me to do it. So there's like 10 homilies here. So I want to preach them, but he doesn't want me to, and that's fine. This closing again, kind of, it's an echoing of the various themes of the Gospel of Matthew, at least going back to the Sermon on the Mount, the Beatitudes and the rest. The being perfect as your heavenly Father is perfect. And what does God's perfection mean? How are we to reflect God's perfection? We're to reflect it in love. And so that's why Jesus can close this short little, I would say, condemnation against the scribes and the Pharisees. Whoever exalts himself will be humbled. Whoever humbles himself will be exalted. Just in the same way that I said, let's take that measure, love of God and love of neighbor as self, and make sure that our whole life aligns with that, because that's Jesus' whole life, and our lives are meant to reflect his. In fact, we're called to be alter Christi, right? We're called to be an alter Christus. We're called to be other Christs. You're called to be Jesus. You're his body. You are Jesus. You are Jesus. If you're not, no one is. Right? You are Jesus, and you have to take that seriously. And that means the alignment of our whole life with the greatest commandment. Love of God with our whole heart, mind, soul, and strength. And the encouragement, praise God, right? The encouragement that he's doing it in us. He's doing it in us. We can't do it ourselves. And so all of that, but here again, perhaps another way, which is perfectly aligned with that way, that means of evaluation, or those high standards, is whoever exalts himself will be humbled, whoever humbles himself will be exalted. Because Jesus just came out and he said, okay, look, they do this and that, and they don't do this and don't do that, and all the rest. But he's not, by that measure, establishing a new moral perch from which to look down and condemn everybody else. This is not what he's doing. He's freeing the people from these other standards, worldly standards, that enslave them. And what he's doing is freeing them to love. He's freeing them to do the great things of the law, right? To get the plank right before the speck. So he's freeing them to love God with the whole heart, mind, soul, and strength, neighbor, self. But the other is this, and this is a test for us, because sometimes we can say, you know what, yeah, I do love God. I mean, nobody can tell, but I do love God, right? Like, and not just nobody can tell, but, I can't really tell either. But I do love him. I just don't, maybe I don't know how to express it or something. This is a tough one, right? Love is tough. And not just because love is tough, but because it's hard to measure. It's hard to, am I doing it well? And all the rest. Am I really living to that standard, or am I not? And yeah, I love him, and to show how much I love him, I'm going to leave him well enough alone, because he's got enough. And whether that's God or my neighbor, he's got enough on his plate without worrying about me. So I'm going to leave him alone. I mean, okay, so love God, whole heart, mind, soul, and strength, and neighbor herself. Here's another one: whoever exalts himself will be humbled; whoever humbles himself will be exalted. I don't know if we know our hearts well enough to know the working of the ego, right? To know when I am exalting myself and when I am humbling myself, or better than that, when am I allowing myself to be humbled in a way, right? In the sense of, like, I don't have to exert myself here. I don't have to be right here. We don't have to go my way here. Right? These are words of humility. Right? We can pray that litany of humility. I should send it out again. Right? We should pray that litany of humility. Right? What are we going for? Are we going for the ways of ego-aggrandizement? Because that's what the scribes and the Pharisees, Jesus' condemnation of them is that's what the scribes and the Pharisees were going for. And they were using the things of religion to, quote unquote, build themselves up, prop themselves up, inflate their egos. And it's not that way. That's not what love looks like. That's not what love looks like. So, okay, read the litany of humility or 1 Corinthians 13 and see whether or not we're lining up that way. But again, we're not living this way to exalt ourselves. And anytime we find ourselves doing that, we ought to pull back. We ought to humble ourselves. And we humble ourselves by living into the truth, right? Humilitas, what is it? Humilitas veritas. The humility is the truth. We live into the truth of who God is by humbling ourselves before him and submitting ourselves to the King, submitting ourselves to God's anointed, to Jesus. And we trust and follow him, not simply where he leads, but how he leads as well. And he leads us in the way of self-gift that he walked himself. Right? He leads us in the victory that he accomplished and that he now makes possible for us, so that we can go the way of humility. We can go the way of love, no matter what the challenges are to that. Even my own massive ego, he can defeat. Even our massive egos, God can defeat. It's ours to give ourselves over to him so that he can accomplish that good work in us.